What's up, guys? Benway MMA here, and today we will be ranking the UFC pound for pound list by their striking skill. We'll be starting with the number 15 Arman Tsarukyan and working our way up to the number 1 pound for pound fighter Islam Makhachev. Without further ado, let's just get started with number 15 Arman Tsarukyan. Where would I rate Arman Tsarukyan? I think this is actually a pretty good fighter to start the tier list because I believe he belongs in the D tier and he can kind of serve as our litmus test for future fighters. How is Arman Tsarukyan striking? Well, I think it's pretty simple to describe because his striking is also pretty simple itself. It's very serviceable with strong fundamentals. He actually has pretty good, knockout power. He KO'd Beneil with a right hook, and he landed a lot of damage on Dan Hooker. He has basic but effective boxing. He uses the jab straights and overhands very effectively. He uses very simple combos, 1-2 kick, 1-2 high kick. But he's got pretty damn good and underrated knees. His kicks as well are pretty damn good. They're very, very fast. But some knocks against him and why he's in the D tier and what really separates him from the other fighters in this list is that he's limited in creativity and volume. His only dynamics or variance in techniques is flashy kicks such as his axe kick or his spinning kicks. Spinning back fists he'll sometimes throw in there. Besides that, he's pretty much throwing 1-2s, 3s, and kicks. Very, very simple kicks. Another thing that people probably haven't noticed as much is that his striking defense is still very, very questionable. He tends to just back out in a straight line and or clinch/grapple if things get uncomfortable in the feet. And it's because he's a striker second and a grappler first. And so I think that captures him perfectly. And he belongs in the D tier because of that. And so moving on to our next fighter, guys, we have Della Maddalena, JDM. I don't know why the fuck I said his name like that, but Jack Della, I think this is going to surprise a lot of people, but I think especially after his last fight, you have got to put bro, unfortunately, in the C tier. And I know that's going to piss a lot of people off because, JDM does have clean boxing. He has incredible body shots and combos. He mixes in elbows and knees very well. It makes him, he's an absolute pocket monster when it comes to fighting in the pocket. He has very good shot selection. But he's in the C tier, guys, because of that underwhelming performance against Islam. Even considering the takedowns and the takedown threat, he had such a garbage-ass striking performance. And if you start to kind of look under the hood and analyze the fighter, it starts to fall apart a little bit, him arguing above the C tier for JDM. His resume is pretty untested against elite strikers of welterweight. He's only really fought Gilbert Burns, Bilal, and now Islam Makhachev. None of those guys are particularly good strikers at welterweight. All of those guys, except Islam Makhachev, who he lost to, have found a lot less success, especially in the striking. He does have fair power, but it can be a little bit underwhelming, especially in the hands at least. Maybe Bilal has a blocked chin, but JDM is getting TKOs at welterweight while Carlos Prates is knocking people out and they don't fucking move. Shout out Lil Heath and Jeremy Stevens. But for those reasons, JDM just cannot be above the C tier. And again, this is a striking list for the pound for pound fighters, guys. And so unfortunately, when you're in the pound for pound, you're going to be in the C tier, even if you are still a very, very good striker. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, guys, we have Magomed Ankalaev. Big Ankh, Russian Abe Lincoln. Where does he belong? I believe it's the B tier. Let me explain. So, Ankalaev has, overall, I would say, very good technical and fundamental striking. He has that combat sambo background, which traditionally, I understand has a lot of those judo throws, etc., but it also has very sharp kicks and punching counters. He uses those kicks to stab at opponents or prevent them from circling out, and he basically boxes them in. He has, for light heavyweight, some of the best distance control and timing, but what keeps him out of the A or S tier is his biggest weaknesses, which is his lack of volume or aggression. He has pretty mid-tier power for a light heavyweight of his technical prowess. His recent loss to Alex Pereira makes his original win against Alex Pereira look much weaker. And he is kind of similar to JDM, where if you start to look under the hood and analyze his resume, he hasn't fought the light heavyweight striking elite. He has that draw over Yan. He has a win over Alexander Rakic. He has the win over Alex P, which was then avenged into a loss. And so those two wins that he does have that were not avenged are aging very poorly and are definitely not representative of the light heavyweight striking elite at this point in time anymore. And so yes, I would agree that Ankalaev is a technique maxer in MMA, kickboxing, but he just lacks the X factors or, attributes or the resume success of other fighters on this list to be ranked higher than the B tier. And so moving on to number 12 on the pound for pound list, guys, we have Joshua Van, my little Asian male, the fucking Myanmar beast. Don't know why I said Asian male. I think I was trying to say like first Asian male champion or something, actually born in Asia, but that sounded fucking weird as fuck. Anyways, I'm putting him in the B tier. I think this will surprise some people. I think you could argue that he belongs in the C tier as well. But Joshua Van has elite offensive boxing and pretty goddamn good power for a flyweight. He likes to chain together crispy combos and has great instincts for flurry or finish. If he feels like you're hurt, he will absolutely unload on you. He has very fast and serviceable kicks. They're nothing special, but they really don't need to be. He's willing to mix up his striking and be creative. He adjusts his striking to his opponents on the flow. We saw that during the Brandon Royval fight where he started, using the oblique kick, which is representative of a fighter with high striking fight IQ. And he really just reminds me of a young and unrefined or unpolished version of Petr Yan, where he's kind of, relentless and always looking for damage in his stand-up. Maybe less of a Muay Thai style, more of a boxer style, but still very, very effective. He's overall very sharp and has very crisp striking, and he puts a beating on pretty much all of his opponents. But what keeps him out of the A and S tier is honestly his subpar, striking defense, if anything. He's gotten caught about 3 or 4 times out of his 10 fights. One of those resulted in him getting, knocked out by Charles Johnson. And I think 2 other times he's been dropped in his career so far. And so I know a lot of people would argue that because he hasn't been, the Charles Johnson that was one fight, it was a fluke. And I guess you could argue it was a fluke, guys, but I do think, his striking defense is going to be his biggest weakness as he moves up the division. I actually don't think it'll be his grappling defense. And again, beyond that, we haven't seen enough of his resume against other elite strikers at flyweight in order to rank him higher. We've only seen him against the likes of a Brandon Royval. We didn't get to see him strike against Pantoja, and not that Pantoja is even a great striker. And so yeah, Joshua Van in the B tier. Moving on to our next fighter, guys, we have DDP, sexy man. Anyways, DDP, where do we put DDP? This guy could be in the F tier, according to some people, be in the S tier, according to some people. But I think he belongs somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the C tier. I think that's a fair, understanding of DDP. And it's quite simple. He has an unorthodox and maybe even, what's the word I want to use here? Like, not untechnical, but effective stand-up skill. He throws non-traditional striking patterns. He mixes in straights, hooks, kicks, looping shots, and often forces his opponents to defend his volume rather than counter it. He has excellent power for a middleweight. We saw that with Khamzat, who alluded to the fact that standing up with DDP for even a second is a huge risk that he just was not willing to take. Again, that good volume and striking cardio for middleweight. We saw that in the Sean Strickland fights, especially the second one, where he outwore Sean Strickland in a stand-up battle. More than Strickland wore him out. Before the Khamzat fight, he was landing 6.12 significant strikes per minute. Afterwards, 5.18, which is some of the highest for middleweight ever, I think. And rather than landing perfect technical shots, Du Plessis kind of overwhelms. I will say his defense is kind of mid. His defense mostly consists of his high guard and his chin, allowing him to absorb basically counter shots while staying in striking range. And so I think DDP is representative of the best, I guess, quote unquote, bruiser style. He's the best elite level brawler that we have in the UFC, but he just lacks the technical prowess, the sharpness, the crispiness, to be considered for a higher rating. And he just relies far too much on his attributes versus skill. And so I think the C tier is a perfect spot to put DDP. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, we have Max Jerome Blessed Holloway. Max Holloway. I think Max Holloway is going to be our first A-tier fighter. So I don't think this will come to a surprise to anybody that Max Holloway is in the A or S tier. I think some people might argue he belongs in the S tier. I wouldn't be too opposed against that. But let me explain why I think he belongs in at least the A tier. He is the perfect example of a volume striker in MMA. He has some of the, unmatched pace, unmatched volume. He has elite range, elite rhythm control. He has some of the best durability and cardio that we've seen in the UFC ever. And beyond that, when in his actual shot selection, he mixes it up to both the body and the head. His body shots disrupt rhythm, and his face shots are basically there to do damage. He has excellent footwork when his back isn't on the cage. Shout out Ilia Topuria. But he's not S tier due to a few inadequacies. First of all, his weakness to sharp power punchers. We saw that in the Ilia Topuria fight. And we've seen that in some of his earlier fights in his career, where he can get bullied by a puncher, a power puncher, basically, an accurate power puncher. He also lacks one-shot knockout power. We know that he can do it, but it's mostly cumulative. Even in his one-shot, quote-unquote, knockouts, like the Justin Gaethje fight, I believe it was more of an accumulation of fatigue and damage on Justin Gaethje than Max Holloway landing like a particularly powerful strike on him. And then again, his losses to Volkanovski and Topuria, two guys who are also going to be on this list, means it would be very premature to place him in the S tier. If he was in the S tier and those other two fellas were also in the S tier, would that make any sense to have someone has multiple losses to other fighters on this list to also be in the S tier? I don't think so. And so for those reasons, I think Max Holloway I think he's a very fair A tier striker in the pound for pound list. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter. Oh, no. Fuck. Oh, Pantoja. Oh. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm a huge Pantoja fan, guys. But he belongs in the D tier. I can't wait for this guy to come back. Anyways, aggressive, willing to exchange. He's got that functional power. He's got actually really good kicks. His kicks, I think, are one of his biggest stand-up assets. And he throws them dumb fucking hard. He throws them max power every time, and it's because he knows he can grapple off of a blocked kick. Oh fuck! Rest in peace, elbow. Or if they catch the kick and they run it down the pipe, he knows he can out grapple them. But his striking is ultimately set up to implement his grappling, and vice versa. He is not a striker; he is a grappler first. And we can see that, he lacks the refinement and the range control. He struggles to win clean striking exchanges against technical opponents, especially at range. He's a lot of defensive holes. He absorbs a lot of strikes and relies on toughness more than, head movement or positioning. Shout out Steve Erceg. The fact that Pantoja was losing to Steve Erceg on the feet is fucking nuts to me. And yeah, again, his grappling carries success. He doesn't win fights because of his striking. He wins despite it. And it's effective, but it's definitely not elite. And I think it's very similar to Arman Tsarukyan here, where his striking is serviceable, but the other parts of his game is what makes him an excellent fighter. It is not his striking. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, Big Tom, yeah. Double eye surgery Tom. Yeah, this guy could be in the F tier soon. He might be fucking blind for life. Anyways, where are we putting Tom Aspinall? I think this one's going to surprise a lot of people. I think this one's going to piss off a lot of people. B tier. Why B tier? Well, I'll explain first, I guess, the good attributes of Tom Aspinall. Unusual speed and coordination for a heavyweight. The moves, the feints, and the combination he throws is like someone from fucking middleweight, not a heavyweight. He has very clean fundamentals and technique, excellent composure. We saw that in the Pavlovich fight, where he can get in kind of a messy, sloppy exchange, get clipped, maintain his striking prowess, and knock the motherfucker out. We've seen in his resume, almost every single one of his fights, is a first round finish, and every single one of his fights that is a knockout is a first round finish. The only fights that go beyond the first round are when he subs people, and I think that kind of shows that he has that fuck you heavyweight power. It's not like I'd say like a Francis Ngannou or a Derek Lewis level of power. It's more precise, it's more accurate, it's more touching them on the button and they go night night, not brutally monster vicious, just meaty hooking them to death like Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Francis Ngannou. But some knocks against Tom Aspinall is, although the Gane fight was short, we got to see that he might not have the success in the feet that we thought he would have against equally skilled strikers at heavyweight. Not that there's a lot of them, which kind of leads into my next point, which heavyweight lacks the depth to adequately say Tom is an S tier or higher fighter. Or I'm sorry, a B tier or higher fighter. The heavyweight division is pretty much a skill desert. And we haven't even seen him in any extended striking exchanges, much less fights. So we have no idea how he looks across, even 3 rounds of actual striking volume. And so I think depending on the Gane rematch and his future fights, he could easily climb to the S tier, but I just think it's so premature to say, what his striking skills truly are, to put him anywhere higher. And I know that's kind of an ass-backwards way of looking at things, because someone will argue, well, the reason that is because he knocks those dudes out so quickly. But my argument against that would kind of be, well, he's fighting fucking taxi cab drivers and unathletics like Marcin Tybura. He's fighting Marcin Tybura. Is like, I don't put as much respect on that as beating up the likes of, like, I don't know, Brandon Royvals and Manel Kops and, who is Max Hall? Dustin Poirier's, Justin Gaethje's, like, those are nuts to me. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, we have the one, the only, Merab Dvalishvili. Merab belongs in the fucking F tier. I think he is our only F tier striker on the list. He has very basic striking. It's that wrestler style striking where he's throwing the meaty hooks and overhands, which usually are, leading to the takedowns or the clinches. And even his clinch striking is pretty fucking meh. It's mostly relegated to like weak, like pussy ass punches, baby knees, like, oh, here's a knee. We've clearly seen him get outstruck in multiple fights now, especially the Yan fight. And we know for a fact his game is clearly based on his grappling and not his striking. He has very little power and does almost zero damage to his opponents. And more often than not, the faces of his opponents are pretty clean, and his is pretty mushed up, even despite him having dominant performances. And even his stand-up, his effectiveness comes from his cardio and his grappling, not his hands. It comes from the threat of grappling. It has nothing to do with his actual striking skill. And his striking, in my opinion, is more of a tool. It's not really a skill set. It exists purely to enable his grappling. And so for those reasons, I believe he belongs in the F tier. He's almost like a worse version of Arman or Alexandre Pantoja. Like, you could not tell me that Merab has better striking than these two guys. But they have that similar style where it's grappler first, striker second. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, we have his bigger brother, his dad, Petr Yan, who I believe needs to join Max Holloway up there in the A tier. Petr Yan striking, let's describe it real quick. Elite Muay Thai striking. He's got that tight guard, that tight high guard, that strong head movement, and that elite balance, which makes it very difficult to hit him cleanly. He loves that counter striking. He's got elite counters. He reads opponents over time and punishes the mistakes, with sharp and accurate counters. Kind of like, I'm talking about when he's downloading data for a round and then all of a sudden he's just fucking unleashing on people. He's one of the better pocket fighters in MMA. He's very comfortable exchanging at close range without losing composure or position. And at range, he's still serviceable with his kicks and his long punches, but his footwork is excellent to where he's always keeping it in a range that he would like, which is usually the pocket or boxing range. Recently, we saw that with the Merab fight, where he had one of the most impressive striking performances against Merab, I would say I've seen in a very long time. Some knocks against him that prevent him from being in the S tier, though, is that he's a slow starter by design. He often gives up early rounds, even if those rounds are in stand-up, while quote-unquote downloading information. We know that he doesn't have fight-ending power like some, I think true S-tier fighters would have. He breaks opponents down rather than overwhelming them. And then finally, I think that loss to O'Malley, while old and debatably a robbery, is still a loss to another striker in a stand-up fight. And so it's hard to argue someone is in the S tier of striking when they might not even be the best striker in their division. But Petr Yan is one of the cleanest technical strikers in MMA. But again, his lack of power, his slow starts, and his loss to Sean O'Malley, make him an A tier striker and not an S tier striker. Anyways, moving on to our next fighter, we got Alexander Volkanovski, who I also believe belongs in the A tier as well. So why A tier? I think it's because of his elite striking IQ more than anything. I think he does have pretty much perfect and very clean and fundamental technique. But his ability to use feints, footwork, stance switches, etc., to manufacture exchanges in which he can, win reliably, rather than relying on pure power or size, is incredible. And traditionally he's been undersized in most of his fights, and he consistently is able to outthink elite strikers that are bigger than him. He neutralized fighters like Max Holloway, like Yair Rodriguez, like Diego Lopez. He's able to maintain very solid volume despite the power that he has. And again, that power is very solid for his size. He's rocked pretty much all of his opponents, including Islam Makhachev, except Ilia Topuria. He was not able to rock Ilia Topuria, unfortunately. And I guess some cracks against Alexander Volkanovski preventing him from being in the S tier is that his defense is a little questionable. Especially against those, looping power punchers like Topuria, like Diego Lopez. And again, this is a tier list for the, what these fighters are currently right now. And so I know past Volkanovski could arguably be an S tier striker, but he has currently lost some of the speed and reaction time that might have had him in the S tier before. And those KO losses to Makhachev and Topuria, I don't think you can put him in the S tier with those KO losses. So yeah, Alexander Volkanovski in the A tier. Moving on to our next fighter, we have number 4 on the pound for pound list, Alex Pereira, who I believe is our first S tier striker on the list. And I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. Every single fight he has at light heavyweight, he has won by knockout. He has one split decision against Jan Blachowicz, but that's Jan. But yeah, he knocks motherfuckers out clean. He has elite knockout power. Every strike carries fight-ending potential. His opponents are forced to respect and fear every single shot that Alex Pereira throws, including even his fucking leg kicks are disgusting. For a light heavyweight, he's got unmatched precision and timing. He doesn't just throw hard. He's precise. He picks his shots and he lands them. He's got consistency under pressure. I know, it's been a while, but the Israel Adesanya fights, all of them have shown that he can handle pressure against truly elite strikers. But what it really comes down to, why is this guy in the S tier, is this guy has chommed pretty much everyone he's fought, including all of his losses. His loss to Ankalaev being avenged in the way it did is very impressive to me. And light heavyweight, if you really look at it, is a murderer's row of strikers, and Alex Pereira has fought pretty much all of them and finished all of them. I do think he's the greatest light heavyweight striker of all time. I think he's the greatest light heavyweight finisher of all time, and he's an easy S tier butt in. I don't think there's any debate for this one, guys. And so yeah, Alex Pereira in the S tier. Moving on to our next fighter, we have Khamzat Chimaev, number 3 on the pound for pound list. And I think this is going to surprise some people, but not too much. Maybe those people are just fucking, I don't know, retarded. D tier. Khamzat Chimaev is in the D tier. He has decent technique and mechanics, but he's still very, very raw and lacks the striking acumen to really mix it up. Especially compared to other strikers on the list, he does not have elite stand-up. You know, his best weapon is actually his jab, which is pretty powerful and is more of a damaging jab than a range-finding jab. But again, he just has low refinement, low variation. He relies heavily on aggression and chaos rather than strategy or setup. And like a lot of fighters on this list, his striking complements his grappling. It's mostly a tool to create openings for takedowns or clinch work. You know, and he's been outstruck by the likes of Usman. He was outstruck, or not outstruck, but he went life and death with fucking Gilbert Burns, who since that fight has looked like a steaming hot pile of dog shit. But he doesn't even need the striking, you know, as he's one of the best grapplers in the UFC, maybe the best grappler in the UFC right now. And so he doesn't even need the striking. He doesn't need to use it. And I do think if you look at this list, it's very fair to put Khamzat Chimaev in the D tier. Anyways, moving on to our number 2 pound-for-pound fighter on the list, we have Ilia Topuria, who I think, you know, undisputed, undebatable S-tier shoe-in. And let's talk about Ilia Topuria's striking for just a little bit. We all know what it looks like, but he combines forward movement with that counter-striking in a way that makes his aggression feel just like surgical, you know? He throws multi-level attacks, you know, body, head, body, you know, head, and kicks in unconventional sequences. You know, he's not just throwing a 1, 2, 3. He's throwing a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 punch combo. You know, and his ability to land clean, fight-ending shots is just truly elite. He's not just throwing to overwhelm fighters, but he picks his shots and he lands them like a fucking sniper. You know. And I think maybe not underappreciated, but something truly to respect in Ilia Topuria's stand-up is his elite footwork. I think he has some of the best cage cutting in the UFC. His ability to corral people into exchanges on the fence where his best work is done is incredible. You know, and sometimes he doesn't even need that. He has the confidence to just throw fire in the middle of the octagon like he did against Charles Oliveira and still get the knockout. And if you look at his resume, much like Alex Pereira, it's him knocking out pretty much fucking everybody. But he has knocked out 3 greats in a row, all in dominant fashion: Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and Charles Oliveira. And so I think it's very easy to put Ilia Topuria in the S tier. Moving on to our final fighter, the number 1 pound-for-pound ranked fighter in the UFC, Islam Makhachev. Where does he go? Surprise! C tier. I think Islam Makhachev is technically very sound. He has almost perfect fundamentals. You know, he mostly throws basic combination. He rarely throws, you know, unconventional or fight-disrupting sequences. But I will say he has top-tier striking IQ. You know, he knows what his limitations are. He knows what his tools are during stand-up fights. And he knows what his opponent's tools are as well. And he game plans around them perfectly. We saw that in the JDM fight with the use of the leg kick. He does have decent power, but not one-shot knockout power. If he's going to knock you out, it has to be something like a head kick like we saw against Volk, or some sort of knee, or an accumulation of punches, or a TKO, but it's really never going to be a one-shot knockout. And he's not higher because his grappling threat, in my opinion, severely carries his striking capabilities. I do think, don't get me wrong, I think fundamentally he's a pretty damn good striker, but I do think the reason he has so much success in the stand-up is not because he's a particularly amazing striker, but it's because he is such an incredible grappler that you always have to be constantly worried about the takedown. That you're really not thinking about the left high kick or the body kick or the leg kick coming at you from Islam Makhachev. And so again, you know, he lacks that fight-ending power. He was reliant on the grappling to dominate. But he does still have very, very clean striking. I think he can be competitive with pretty much anyone in the A tier when it comes to striking, A tier or below. But I don't think his striking is successful because of his striking skill alone, if that makes sense. I think it's actually because of his grappling skill is why he finds so much success. Anyways, guys, that completes my ranking the UFC pound for pound list tier list. If you agree, disagree, make sure to comment below. If you like my videos, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.